Okay, thank you, Claire. We have a new scope and software setup today that I think is better. I'm still learning some things regarding setup and lighting and full screen. So today we're doing Hylaeus. So anyway, there may be some learning curve things here and getting things right, but in general, my playing around with all this seems to indicate that we're going to be in better shape. Okay, so one feedback thing would be to have any of you let me or Claire know in the chat whether the feed that you guys see is buzzy or not once we go live. In other words, whether you get, what would that be called? Some ghosting and things as I move the specimen around. Looks great right now, but I'm going to go and switch my screen to share, and we'll do some things under the scope first just to make sure that everyone is seeing a good specimen of Hylaeus, and then we'll talk. So screen. Okay, so right now we're seeing, I hope, I highlight a specimen and all the other gear that I'm having a hard time make go away, except I can go to now a full screen mode doing this. And now I'm going to move it a little bit and then stop. So is that reasonable? Better, hopefully, than other times as I'm moving things around? You may not, you don't, no need to get live here, I guess, but just let Claire know if for whatever reason you're not seeing things or you're getting a lot of ghosting as I move this around. This is theoretically at a higher quality level images than previously.
Yep,
Okay.
Sam, it's looking good, and there wasn't the jumpiness that we would experience before.
Okay.
Very clear.
Yeah. All right. Yay, new software. And thank you so much, Craig, for starting this whole thing off by loaning us from the Forest Service, which took some doing, including driving it down here from West Virginia and all kinds of lovely things, the original scope. So thank you, and we appreciate you a lot. Okay, so today, Hylaeus. So Hylaeus masked bees, you know, so-called because of the yellow markings on the face. I'm going to turn off my, close my blinds here so I can see a little bit better. And so we'll go into Discover Life guides here in a little bit. I want to show a number of characters for the females initially, and then we can go to the males. That may take 2 sessions here. I'll mention in a very general way that some of the issues here with Hylaeus are that the maculations or the markings, so maculations usually mean these light colored markings here on the face and elsewhere in other parts, they're sometimes there and they're sometimes not. Sometimes when they're not supposed to be there, in other words, the general characters of that species are that it may not have colors, for example, on the pronotal collar here. Then every once in a while, there's a little mark or something. So that has to be kept in mind in that these markings are really important, and that many times you'll get, particularly in the females, you'll get sports where for example, the facial markings are increased or decreased. Along the pronotal collar here, you'll often get markings that disappear or appear very faintly, sometimes when there's supposed to be none. And other times you'll get something that I see sometimes also in Ceratina, which is the light colored markings turn from a yellow, which is what most species have, but not all, and turn completely white to translucent, but yet it's the species for which the normal coloration is yellow. So, you know, this is similar to many, many other groups of species, but it's problematic. Okay, a couple things to look at here in terms of ID. So it's in the Andrina group, and the females, I don't know if they all do, but I think most of them do, have what's known as a facial fovea. And in Andrina, you would see this as relatively large, filled with hairs. In other groups, it's narrow, but it might be, slightly teardrop shape up here above, like Pseudopanergus and Panergynous, and I think Perdita too. In Hylaeus, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, are all linear. So here is this very linear and small fovea. So it's a depressed area, a little difficult to see here. Here's the top of it on the other side. We'll move you'll see this several times. If I move the light, you can see it runs down, then runs back up, and there is an area at the top that where it stops. So this can be a useful characteristic sometimes. So one of the things you would look at is what's the relationship to where it ends and the lateral ocelli. Is it so this isn't lined up so that you can see this well, but you're going to be asked to look at sometimes is whether the top of the facial fovea are below the line of the two lateral ocelli or about halfway up, usually subtle, right? So it could be below, just at the base of the ocelli line, and then sometimes up about halfway up. I don't know if they go any further than that, but it's useful. But again, you're in this group that's often very subtle because it has very few to no hairs. So this particular group, Hylaeus, carries pollen and nectar internally in a crop-like, if you want to use a bird analogy, kind of approach to pollen movement, pollen and nectar, and therefore it looks, as you'll see, and as you've probably seen with your own specimen, it looks like a wasp, right? It looks like a little small wasp, and a lot of times, at least initially, people will often discard this group as a not bee. So the characters, but you'll learn by looking at these things, and you probably already know, that it is a bee, and you'll see in the wing venation is very familiar, and but a lot of the characters are going to be have to do with the surface sculpturing, has to do with markings and or lack of markings, and a lot of times you're just going to be dealing with having to be very both nuanced and precise in trying to go through the guides. And if you're not sure, as usual, you would in the Discover Life and other similar matrix guides skip over specimens and set them aside and come back to them. So a lot of these ambiguous specimens that I'm talking about where markings and colorations don't conform well, just set those aside because usually you'll have a string of them because usually it's a common species, and you can go back and you can do the comparison. Sometimes you'll feel confident that the sport that you're looking at is something that exists in a long string, it's just a variant, and other times you'll just have to put something like Hylaeus near fill in the blank species or Hylaeus species. So giving those things, we've looked at now the facial fovea. Let's see, I'm at my maximum magnification with this particular scope, but you can see that well. There's head shape things. We'll see syniculae here in a second, and I'll show that. So let me just show you the head in a more perspective here. So most of the time, and in males, this is even more so, most of the time the two eyes, the compound eyes, edges of the compound eyes are nearly parallel to one another, but often they converge towards the bottom and diverge towards the top a little bit, and the antennae are above the midline. This is not a good shot because of the angle, but the antennae in almost all species are above the midline or what you would say is the widest point is above the midline here. I will show you one of the few specimens that I've come across of Syniculae, and let me put this down here and get I'm going to get this in the correct box. I should have pulled it out. Why didn't I not do that? Sure. And let's get Syniculae over here. I have it laid out on a card because something happened to the specimen, but I think it's in a good place to see because it isn't on a card. The head is very round, and its center point is halfway. You don't even really have to see the details here, but the head, which maybe we would want to, let me change the white balance here. Can I change it here? Image properties. I'm going to go back and change the white balance. I think I can do it over here. Oh, we can try continuous AE. Does that work? It doesn't look like it's giving us a whole lot of better look there, but let me go back. Apologize to that. This new system. Okay, we're back here. I'm going to play with the light up perhaps a little bit. The thing to notice, though, is that the midpoint here is the widest point. So it's about halfway up the specimen's head instead of well towards the top in most of them. So that's a presentation for Syniculae. Here's the female's fovea again. And I'm going to stop showing this one and move to a different species and species group. So when we're looking at specimens, in addition to colorations, we're also looking at things like surface sculpturing, which the range is, again, relatively low. So here we're looking at Schwartzii. So if we look at the pitting, you can see that the pits almost always touch one another, and they're relatively large. So when we talk about large pitting in Hylaeus, what we're going to do is we're going to compare it to this is the scutum that we're looking at. We're going to compare it to the parapsidal lines over here. Oops. Okay, so here's some pits. Again, they're overlapping, and so that often is not the case. So, and relatively rough, although we can't see that well here, that the sculpturing is much more elevated. But we can see the parapsidal line here, and these pits are as big sometimes and sometimes wider than our parapsidal line, which acts as a marker, a measuring device in a lot of ways. Sam,
can we get a bit more light there?
Yeah, I'm trying to mess around with the light here. Let's see if I can go back. Maybe I should put one of those ring lights that we got on here eventually. See if that will help. I'm going to go back and do white balance again. Doesn't seem to make much of a difference right now. If I go down, it helps a little bit, I think, there. Is that a little bit better there?
That's a little bit better, yeah.
Okay, I'm pretty much.
Oh, there you go. Ah.
Okay. So yeah, so this is a little bit better. So you can see the pits in relationship, and we'll see. In fact, I'll just swap this out now. This is Schwartzii. Schwartzii is a marsh species. We see it along the east coast. I don't think it goes interior at all, and is associated with salt marshes, at least the edges of salt marshes. So if we look at something like, let me see if I can find a largish one. Something like here, which is potentially Illinoensis, but I was unable to, as often is the case with, there's a group affinis, modestus, and Illinoensis, and then there's a species to be described within that, that are very difficult to tell apart. And a lot of times I don't tell them apart. I list, because the most common, in the females, the most common females are, I'm going to get a different specimen that doesn't have a pin right through it. There. These blued specimens do have some benefits. Move that into here. That group is often almost impossible, at least I think, right now, to tell apart in the females. And here is another dark specimen. Let's see, let me find another one that can find a bit of a better shot. Sorry, very dark field today. Put something closer in to get up to these. All these are small specimens. So here you can see what we're looking at is the pits. The pitting is quite small. They're not really over, they're close. They're not overlapping. And then when we look at the parapsital line, we can see that in comparison, they're smaller than that line. Let's see if we can get something close to a good shot here. So here's the parapsital line, and here are, some of the pits. The parapsital line has got glue, it looks like, or something goopy in there, but it marks the parapsital line better. You can see some of the pits have been swallowed up, but you can also see that the pits are smaller, not by a whole lot, because everything about Hylaeus is subtle. So,
Sam, can you move that up to full screen?
Yes. Control-Alt-Shift-F apparently is full screen. Okay, moving this one away. So we can look at leptocephalus, Hylaeus leptocephalus, and look at specimens that have, instead of yellow, have white. Oh, these are male. Females here have white coloration on the back and sides. Rather than the normal yellow. Like this leptocephalus is a species that is pretty much determined to have been brought into the country, not native, but quite a long time ago. The earliest records are from the 1900s. You can see these white markings. And there's a couple other species, including natives, that have those white markings. Let's move to the back on this one. Another area to look at is the propodial area. So here's a propodium. This is the scutum, scutellum, and metanotum are all back in this area here. I think that's the scutellum. And you can see these pits clearly there. But what I'm looking at now is the pattern to the dorsal, although dorsal, it slopes off so rapidly, it's hard to call it dorsal, but the propodial triangle area up here. So you can see here's a triangular going down to the base between the propodium or the thorax and the abdomen. And you can see that the bottom part is bare, and the upper part, we call it wrinkled like a raisin. And that varies by species. So,
Sam, while
yeah.
you're here, can you talk about the carinas?
Yeah, so I'll show a specimen. We'll go back to Schwartzii or a couple of the others. So the carinas on the rear face of the propodium are yet another subtle part to identification here. Let's move this. So what we're looking at, carinas are raised lines, and what we're looking at, Jason Gibbs in his work with lazy glossum often has this lined out a little bit better in terms of nomenclature for this. We're at our highest light level or magnification, which means the light is often problematic. So what we're looking at, and it's hard to see, is there are lines, carina, that are coming up from here and then diverging towards the back of the propodial area and to the lateral sides. In this case, there is very little obvious carina action. And we'll pop up with nelumbonis or one of the others here in a second to try and get you some better shots of, let's see what happens when we go up, of the carinae on here. But it's difficult to see little of any carina action here because the surface is very sculptured. You have the upper part being extremely wrinkled with little carinae, so little raised lines, and then cells that are divided up. And then the bottom is smooth. And that's one of the features that we look at here. We're also, now that we have it, the amount and pattern of pitting. Again, these pits are very, very small here on the T1, are also useful and will be very small. And so if you have a specimen that's goopy, these can disappear pretty quickly. As far as I know, there's no real useful wing cell morphology. Now that we have this one in play here, let me pull this out and we'll go and get let me move it to the side. Let's get, let's see if we can get one of the Schwartzii ones. I'm looking for one that has, there we go, this one's pretty open. So Schwartzii, I think we were looking at that before, is very sculptured, has large pits. This is the salt marsh specialist again, along the sides, and it also has these carinae on the back. This might actually show, so we're looking in this area, carina going that way, carina going that way, carina going down. And let's see if I can, we're looking at a oblique shot with a need for more light. Let's bring this up a little bit more. So at this high magnification, what we're looking at is this architecture is so dark.
Sam, I'm sorry, I missed what species you have there.
This is Schwartzy,
Okay.
and is, as the name implies, mostly black. And we're trying to get some shot of, again, another, I'm going to move the specimen a bit, be more upside down. Subtleties. Now we're looking at the abdomen towards the propodium. Thankfully, the specimen is bent. And you can see actually one of the characteristics of this particular group is there is some hair back here on the back face of the propodium. So we're seeing these areas splitting off. I believe this is actually illustrated in the guide, but we can always use more illustrations. And when I move to higher magnification, it becomes more difficult to see the carina coming up from the base. So we're upside down now. So from the base, splitting that way and that way with different architecture. And move up to the propodium here. You can see it's very unsatisfying in terms of the amount of light on this stark specimen. We're looking at just again these shots of these carina coming up, not well illustrated, I'm afraid. In this case, almost having drawings is a better activity. All right, let me pull this one.
The other question that we have, and just also while talking about carinas, is we'd like to see, so in Discover Life, it talks about the pebbled or the raisin. So you showed us kind of the example of raisin. Can you show us an example of the pebbled?
Yeah, let me.
And then while doing that, also talking about Nagin asks, distal part of the propodial triangle has all those carinae, which makes it look less like a raisin to me. So I guess, yeah, how do you distinguish when it is raisin wrinkled throughout the whole? How do you distinguish whether or not that is carina or not?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question. I don't have a good answer for the whole propodial triangle because it's not defined well, but usually when the upper part, the bottom part where the V comes down on the rear face of the propodium is usually the part that's marked well. The upper part can just, like there can be no carina whatsoever. So the entire upper surface can be usually wrinkled like a raisin. I'm going to jump to Discover Life here, and let's go to, I'm going to use it like you can, which is to find good specimens that don't have that particular feature. So we're going to go to Menu, Has, and we're going to go to thorax, propodium, appearance of propodial triangle, and we're going to go to Only. So Only means whatever we click down here, that the specimens over here only have that character. In other words, they don't have multiple, they're not scored for multiple things. So pebbled throughout, or mostly so, is what we're interested in seeing an example of. And we have two. Neither of which I have specimens for, and both of which are species from down in Florida. So probably, let's see what, if we do has, which means it's scored for more than one thing. That add Fedorica, which we do see every once in a while. I have no specimens of Fedorica, but it is extremely rare too. So I don't know that either of these have Formosus I've seen in Cuba. Granicheri, I think, is extremely rare. Let's see, here's a female. It's difficult to see. I wonder if we can get up to a magnification here. So if you recall, so here's the scutellum, metanotum. This is the propodium. You see no wrinkled faces here whatsoever. So the general character that we were just talking about there is not, for most of us, not going to be that useful because we don't see these rare species that often. Let's go back to has and to propodium appearance effect. So we have, though, we have wrinkled throughout and then wrinkled only in the basal portion. So that's, let's look at wrinkled throughout. And we can look at only. So these should be the best examples species and see if anything is, but we do have those. So that Schwartzii one that we just saw, let's look at ornatus, because I want to talk about ornatus because it's a problem species at some time. So Schwartzii and ornatus and nelumbonis and confluens, but not Pictopes, are all in this same group. Pictopes is another introduced species, and it's now found in New England, at least parts of New England, Ohio, Ontario, and probably is going to move throughout some of these areas. I'm going to flip back now. And what we're looking at is ornatus, which is a fairly large one species. It's associated with marshy areas. It can be salt marshes, but it definitely bleeds into any marsh or wetland area in freshwater areas throughout the East. In theory, they all have, let's see, let's start with a classic example. In theory, nelumbonis and ornatus are easy to tell from something like Schwartzii because they have a nice red marking on their abdomen. I'm going to show, this is the classic, and most of them, ornatus, have this, but, and there's in some ways no need to show the alternative because it appears now without any confirmation from molecular at this point that some of these species that we have specimens that are from the same area that have no red whatsoever, and the entire abdomen, instead of having this reddish area, are completely dark. So again, this variation in the group is annoying. That's a male. Let's pull a female here and we'll look at the wrinkled throughout propodium situation. And this remains why a lot of specimens are tricky, and I often end up with working on Hylaeus last in some of these collections. They also don't show up a lot in bowl traps compared to other species. They tend to be more common netting, and they're usually netted on, they have very short tongues, so they're often on umbelliferous types of things. Queen Anne lace is a common place to find them. So we're looking, there's the abdomen, so we're looking straight back. Here's these carina coming up, and the relative hairiness here that you don't see much. You can see, I'm going to move this a little bit back and forth. You can see that this area here, which in other species is without any raised areas, it's smooth, has wrinkles or carini, however you want to do it, rugosity, and is like the surface of a raisin throughout the whole back end. And here's like these carini coming up and defining different sections. But again, the area is extremely rough, so it's often difficult to define, like, am I looking at a carina or am I not looking at a carina? Yeah, I don't have lots of words of advice, although you can expect to struggle when you look through this group for these kinds of reasons. So one of the characters of so actually this is nelumbonis. So this one, is this from Minnesota? Yeah, this is from Minnesota. So in the Midwest, you have basically the same thing. So nelumbonis is associated with, in fact, nelumbonis, I think, is referring to water lilies or spatterdock. I'm not sure. But instead of having the carina, not the carina, the pronotum here. So this is the pronodal collar. So the pronotum is that very first segment on the thorax. When you look down from the dorsal part, you're only seeing this collar-like part here. The head is resting back. This is the pronotum down here too, which sometimes we peek in there and look for ridges and whatnot, like in Andrena. This has no markings in nelumbonis, and an ornatus has markings. But again, to just trick everybody up, some ornatus appear to have no markings there. So if you're getting all these ornatus and then you get one nelumbonis, you should be thinking that maybe it's just a nelumbonis that doesn't have any markings. And this is just generally true. So look at the bulk of your specimens first. Don't obsess over any one particular one, and then come back to the odd ones and just ask yourself, and could this be just a sport of, if it's not coming out clearly or it's coming out to something rare or different, and it looks exactly the same morphologically when you do the back and forth, just be aware that it could very well be something that has added a little extra color or subtracted a little extra color. Okay, so here's a good shot here. You can see this thin line here. So this is the parapsital line. Almost all bees have this osmia. It's very narrow and very short, almost absent. And here's the pitting. So this is a little bit easier to see. And you can see that these pits are subtly wider than the little narrow slot there. And there is an appearance of more ruggedness. And Schwartzii is the most rugged looking of them, so it's actually got more of a raised face here. But you can see that even here in ornatus, the central area is confluent, they would call it. So the pits run into one another, and way in the south you get confluence. So in the traditional keys, this black ornatus, so sorry, this is nelumbonis, but basically the same thing. If you have a specimen that has no red abdomen up north, it's going to key out to confluens, which is basically a Florida species, and may just be ornatus without the colorful back end too, for all we know. But just beware that right now the thinking is, and hopefully there's a revision going on in Corey Sheffield's group that we will find out more once they look at their little molecules in there. When talking about the shape and size of the facial fovea, a lot of what you're going to be looking at is the relationship to the upper edge, to the insertions of the eye sockets. Again, there are variations to that, and then the relative width. So in a lot of species, I'm going to slip over to Maffei, which is one of our smallest and most common ones, these maculations are still there, but they're just little straight lines. Also note that on the Hylaeus, you can, with a bit of imagination, see different kinds of patterns to the surface sculpturing, which includes some pits, and it also you can see in these paraocular areas where these color marks are. There's different pitting in there. That can also be useful. A lot of times you really want your comparative, like, okay, I'm looking at two specimens, I'm going back and forth between them. They have different things going on. They must be different species. Just don't be fooled by these surface things, the colors.
Sam, before you move on to Maffei, or are you done?
Pardon now?
I have something I want to read from the chat from Anne.
Okay.
And a request. In Orem 2018, it's a thesis. The following character is early in his key, and I'm not certain to get it. Mesopisternum with lamelliform carina separating anterior and lateral faces, as in Hylaeus, punctatus, or not others.
Yeah. Okay, I can show you that one.
So, and real quick, sorry, before we move on, I just see something in the chat. Can you point out the fovea in the specimen you have on the screen real quick? And then going back to the
okay, a couple things there. One is if someone has a link to that thesis, that would be great. I don't think I've seen it. That's the person, I'm pretty sure, who is revising the bees, the Hylaeus bees, but I don't know that he's published anything actually yet. So, so you want to also see the facial fovea, did you say, or what else on this
yeah, just while you have that on the screen, can you put your cursor on the facial fovea?
Okay, so here you can't see much, but so here's the compound eye, here's a facial fovea running, and they always parallel in the lower part, the eye, and then in some species, verticalis is a good example. The upper part, let's see if I can bend this, the upper part diverges from that straight line. In other words, it moves towards the ocelli away from the eye rather than staying in a straight line. So we're at our usual difficult to see high power. So here's that. The fovea again runs up, and it does depart, but it's basically still following the straight line. And in some species, it curves quite a bit to the right. In Discover Life, we often overscore these things. So I don't know if, for example, we have scored that for diverging or not in that. And you can see that it doesn't quite reach the even the lower part of the two lateral ocelli. If we draw a line across the bottom there, you can see that facial fovea falls short. Others are up, either kissing that line, that imaginary line, or are above. Let's see, we wanted to see the, so Hylaeus tends to get shipped around the world and is often involved in, hang on for 1 second, let me put this away. Okay, that's away. And is involved often because it will nest in little tiny pithy stems and sometimes cracks. It ends up showing up as invasive species. So let's see, we have several. So the ones that have the carina that we're going to look at are, and then I'll go back and show the lack of the carina. On the mesopisternum are Hylaeus and punctatus. Punctatus being more southern, which we see regularly. We don't have in Maryland Hylaeus, which I pulled. What did I do with it? Is this it here? No. So we have I know that I pulled it out. Oh, here it is. Okay. So the males have some distinctive, interesting parts to them too, but let's see if we can see the mesopisternum. So I'm looking at punctatus, and it is a female now. And we'll bring this in to view, hopefully. And what we're looking at is, so these are often, I'll also point out, often in disturbed areas, weedy spots, cities, those kinds of places, rather than, I don't know that I see them ever in natural habitats. But that's probably not 100%, but you should have your vibes on that.
What species you got up on deck?
Pardon?
What's that species?
This is punctatus.
Punctatus,
So this
thank
is
you.
one of the 2 species in North America right now that have this mesopisternum carina thing. Often that seems to be associated with where the, this is going to be tricky to show, I think. It's often associated with where the legs tuck into the side. And let me just see under my other microscope, right, what the angle would be on here. All right, let's do something like this. So what we're going to look for here in terms of orientation is the pronotal lobe, and then go down from there, because very near the front, right? It's where this species can tuck its legs in. Oops, I missed the species, which is right here. All right, good, we got it. Oops. So we'll zoom in a little bit here. Here's a pronotal lobe. So this is the pronotum, pronotal collar is above. Often, as you can see here, there's coloration on the pronotal lobe and on the tegula in these species, which can be useful and is a marker here. So the carina that we're talking about is, instead of a rounded over surface between the lateral side and the anterior side or anterior face of the mesopisternum. So the mesopisternum is the big plate that sits below the area where the front wing is inserted, and often has good characteristics. In this case, what we're looking at, I'll move in a little bit more, is this sharp angle with a carina. So you can see this carina here, and really it's not a super noticeable raised line. Like these raised lines seem to be much bigger, but the point is that you have this sharp turning in along with a smooth face. Maybe we need to express that more with more words or more articulately on that. And then this area is relatively smooth. This leg would tuck into there. So things like Dianthidium often have that kind of thing too. So do people see that? Character? I'll flip to a different species, and so where we can see that this transition is not sharp. It's simply rounded over to the anterior face.
We have chats of confirmation and gratitude.
Okay. All right. So let me move out of our friend Punctatus, and let's move to Maffei, because it's a super common species that's seen a lot. Let me just set up the shot here on my that one does not show well. How about this one? That hopefully will show well. So Maffei is characterized, and sometimes has it, sometimes doesn't, by the presence of a of being small, even smaller than most, and having no marking on the pronotal collar. So we're looking at the face, very relatively narrow, but not quite linear facial marking. So this is the top of the head. Here's pronotal collar. No yellow there, but usually with yellow on the pronotal lobe, and then also yellow on a dot of yellow on the tegula, which I have found to sometimes be there and sometimes not. Now, let's see if I can get us some reasonable light in here. Change the focus of my lamps. And now what we're going to do is go to the pronotal lobe again and go down and see if we can, maybe I should have chosen a larger specimen. See if we can visualize the lack of a carina. It still curves over, right? So there still is a transition from the lateral side to the anterior side, but there's no carina there. I'm desperately trying to, maybe I'll back off one click, get some more light in there. But I think you can kind of see that this surface is three-dimensional, but there is there's no sharp line, no sharp turn, no raised line that is defining the transition from lateral to anterior. I'll show something else here on the face of the Maffei, which is they often, but again, not 100% of the time, and in Discovery Life it's marked for both, have a marking, a smudgy mark at the base. Where the heck did it go? At the base of the clipeus. This is a lateral upside down shot, so I just will point it out here as there's that mark. Let me just see if I can now move that to better view of the clipeus. I can't even see the damn thing this level. There, it should be better. Okay, so small, very almost always a black or lack of coloration on the pronotal collar. And then a lot of the times there's just a hint of a smudgy yellow area. Nothing so bold as this. These are relatively narrow. Unlike Syniculae, you know, the widest part is above the midline and above the antenna. On that one. The most common group, sadly, is affinis and modestus. And they, let me put Maffei away here. And they are just extremely difficult to tell apart for the females. Let me find a female here.
While you're looking, do you also have an annulatus?
Uh-huh. Do you want to see annulatus? So that one.
There's a couplet here that compares that with the affinis set.
With the affinis?
Mm-hmm. It just distinguishing the paraocular maculations.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we can pull annulatus too. I don't know that I actually have any, because the females of the because I set them all aside, so I don't have them in the collection of affinis/modestus, but it is usually the most common species group, but I don't identify the females to species. You'll see in sorry, I'm looking at two different things here. You'll see in I'm going to pull annulatus. And Mitchell, that he tells them apart, but oh man, I've looked through so many of those and I cannot figure them out. So hopefully, did Orem, does he have species level keys for things like Affinis modestus in the publication of his thesis? I'm really curious now to see that.
We got the link to it. Haven't read it yet, so please tell me in the chat if you have.
Okay. All right, so here's a classic annulatus. So we have also, if we're comparing it to Maffei, so here we have fairly narrow, like in Maffei, maculations. They tend towards white, but not always. They're often, but not always. Sometimes it's dark. A marking. This is a super distinct one, okay? But a lot of times it's smudgy, sometimes even gone white mark at the bottom. If it's at this level, it's you know it's annulatus. But again, the little tricky things. If we look back at the pronotal collar, you can see that it is dark like Maffei, but pronotal lobe, and there's a spot there. I believe one of the main characters for annulatus in the females, or is that verticalis? I can't remember. I thought that pretty sure that the front tibia has only a small amount of yellow on it, and Maffei has about half. So
accurate.
Okay, and if we look at this, the males are very distinct because it has this huge inflated, which we'll have to wait for next time. How much time do we have left? I can't see it on my thing.
We're at the hour, but
Okay.
Can keep going. I also, when we're done with this one, I have an answer to what he says in the guide. Okay,
so here is the front tibia, femur up here, and you can see there's just a small amount of yellow. In the ciliae, it goes down easily halfway and often is much more yellow than this. So again, yellow, white, hard to tell apart there. So now that we have the specimen and we're wrapping up, let's look at the scutum. This one should have relatively fine pitting on it compared to Schwarzii and things. That it seems to be a clean specimen. Let's see if we can see that pretty easily. I'm going to back down one. So here is the parapsidal line, and you can see the pitting, although these look to be about the same size. Maybe I'm not seeing the pits well enough in this shot, but they seem to be about the same size as the parapsidal line. But no matter what, you can see that that character is also relatively subtle when doing those kinds of comparisons. I'm not sure what it's scored as. And then if we look at the propodial area, we'll see whether the area is pebbled or not pebbled, but completely filled up the, sorry, we can't look at it because the wings are covering that. Let's see if I can find them quickly. This seems to have no wings on it. Just want to look one more time here at what I believe the specimen has, or the species has, which is a bare, unpebbled area towards the backside. So pebbled on the top, and non-pebbled. So you look at this, you can see here's a propodeal triangle. You can see it's way less sculptured than some of the others. Here's the carinae coming up that define the propodeal triangle, much easier to see. There's very little hair to no hair there compared to Schwartzii and those other groups. And you can see that this area fades out to basically smooth away from this high relief area, the raisin effect. So often it's good to, when keying out Hylaeus, particularly when you're starting out with the group, is to take several avenues of attack and see if you're coming up consistently with the same species name. Questions at this point, because I know we're out of time?
I'm going to read what Anne shared about what Orem says between Modestus and Affinis.
Okay.
So pleura with punctures deep and close, interspace distance less than 1 puncture, I think is what that abbreviation means, with interspaces extremely tessellated or striated, and that's Affinis. Or pleura with punctures shallow and sparse, interspace distance greater than 1 pit. Please correct me if I'm wrong with what that means. With interspaces smooth and unsculptured is Modestus.
Okay, I'm going to have to look at that and see if I can get some consistency on some of these specimens. I find Modestus much more common than Affinis, and I'm going to try and pull his guide, his thesis down. It sounds like he's got a lot of species there, so I think class homework is to look through that and see if, I haven't looked through it at all, so see if there's some more characters there that help us divine things. I believe he probably has several new species listed in that too, so that'll be interesting to see. And thanks for finding that.
It's in your inbox. I forget who put the link in. Thank you, Anne, for sharing the link.
The inbox where?
Like your email.
Oh, okay. Oh, good. All right.
Okie dokie. So Hylaeus males next week?
Yep.
Great. Any last questions, comments, concerns for the chat or to unmic? Unmute, what I meant to say. All right. Fantastic. Go team.
Thanks, Claire.
Very tidy little class. Well done.
Okay.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.